Chapter 1. The Masquerade. The great hall of Blackwood Manor glowed with 100 candles, their flames reflected in the gilt-frame mirrors that lined the walls. The evening was one of gaiety and colour, for Lady Blackwood, widowed yet still formidable in presence, had determined that the ancient house should be host to a masquerade such as her late husband would have enjoyed. Guests in elaborate costume drifted through the marble-floored chamber, masks of velvet and feathers concealing identities, but doing little to suppress the undercurrents of rivalry, attraction, and unease that simmered beneath the polite chatter. Captain Hastings, who had accompanied his old friend Hercule Poirot to the gathering, was not altogether at ease amidst such splendour. He tugged rather self-consciously at the black domino cloak he wore, his mask slightly askew upon his honest, good-natured face. Beside him, however, Poirot appeared unruffled, immaculate in evening dress, his small, neat frame commanding attention even amidst the riot of costume. He wore no mask save for a discreet strip of black silk across his eyes, and in his hand rested his silver-topped cane. "It is curious, Hastings," Poirot murmured, surveying the glittering scene with eyes that missed nothing. "A masquerade is, how shall we say, an invitation to deception. Men and women hide their faces, but their natures, those they cannot conceal so easily." "You mean," Hastings said with a laugh, "that you can tell who's who, mask or no mask?" Poirot inclined his head with a modest gesture. "One observes, one notes. The manner of the walk, the gesture of the hand, the timbre of the voice. Already, mon ami, I have named to myself 6 persons who hope to pass incognito." Before Hastings could reply, their hostess approached, her gown a sweep of emerald silk, her mask adorned with peacock feathers. Lady Blackwood's voice was low and cultured, though sharpened by years of command. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, I am delighted you could attend. You must forgive me, the house is in uproar with so many guests. Still, the occasion demands it." Poirot bowed over her hand with old-world courtesy. "Madame, we are honoured." To see Blackwood Manor restored to its splendour, even for one evening, it is a thing most rare. Lady Blackwood's eyes, bright and calculating behind her mask, flickered to the groups about the hall. "It is rare indeed, and not without peril. Gather too many secrets under one roof, Monsieur Poirot, and sooner or later they will rise to the surface." The words lingered uneasily with Hastings as their hostess swept away. He glanced at Poirot, but the little Belgian detective's face was inscrutable. Only the faintest arch of his brow betrayed that the remark had lodged itself in his formidable mind. They moved among the company. Here was Sir Reginald Brooke, bluff and red-faced, a merchant whose fortune had been made in steel. He laughed too loudly at his own jest, the gleam of avarice never far from his eye. There, leaning languidly against the mantelpiece, was Veronica Vale, an actress of some notoriety, her scarlet mask setting off the pallor of her face. Young Charles Denham, heir to the Denham shipping concern, hovered near her, though she seemed to treat him with careless indifference. By the long windows stood Miss Eleanor Marsh, the ward of Lady Blackwood, slender, fair, and with a touch of nervous fragility in her manner. Her guardian's stern eye rested upon her often, for Eleanor's fortune, so it was whispered, was not inconsiderable. And among these figures Poirot moved like a small but dignified ship upon a crowded sea, his gaze alighting on every gesture, every glance. Hastings, faithful but often bewildered, could not fathom what his friend discerned in these fleeting impressions. At the stroke of 10, the music struck up. A waltz began, couples moving gracefully beneath the glittering chandeliers. Hastings, swept along, found himself dancing with a masked lady, whose laughter tinkled like glass. Poirot, meanwhile, stationed himself by the great staircase, where he could command a view of all comings and goings. It was then that Hastings noticed a certain tension. Sir Reginald's laughter faltered when he saw Charles Denham approach Veronica Vale. A whispered remark passed between Lady Blackwood and her solicitor, Mr. James Harwood, whose dark eyes and thin lips suggested a man who kept more than he revealed. Eleanor Marsh glanced repeatedly at the clock, as though waiting for some signal, or some person not yet arrived. "Monsieur Poirot!" The voice was that of Lady Blackwood, calling across the hall. "You must see the tableau we have prepared. It is in the library, an entertainment to amuse my guests." Poirot inclined his head, and together with Hastings he followed her through the oak doors into the vast library. There, upon a raised platform, servants had arranged an elaborate display. Figures dressed as characters from the court of Louis XIV posed in frozen attitudes of grandeur. Masks glittered with jewels, silks shimmered, and the scent of roses filled the room. The guests applauded, delighted by the spectacle. But even as Hastings admired the effect, he could not rid himself of a vague disquiet. Perhaps it was the way one of the figures trembled slightly, as though not entirely in command of his nerves. Or perhaps it was merely the oppressive air of secrecy that seemed to hang over Blackwood Manor that night. Poirot's gaze, sharp and unwavering, lingered upon the tableau. For a moment he seemed about to speak, but then the music from the hall resumed, and the guests drifted back to their revels. It was near midnight when the mood shifted. The candles burned lower, the laughter had grown louder yet strained. Then came a cry, a shrill, piercing cry that silenced the room. From the direction of the east wing it rang, echoing, through the manor like the wail of a banshee. Hastings started. Good heavens, what was that? Guests surged towards the sound, masks askew, gowns rustling. Poirot raised his hand, commanding calm, though his eyes gleamed with sudden intensity. "Come, Hastings," he said quietly. "The masquerade, it seems, is over." Chapter 2. The Crime. The throng of guests pressed forward through the long corridor, their silken costumes and feathered masks jostling in a scene far removed from the gaiety of half an hour before. The east wing of Blackwood Manor, seldom used, stretched away in gloom and silence, its portraits of long-dead Blackwoods frowning down upon the intruders. The air was chill here, draughts creeping along the floorboards, and the flicker of the candelabra in Lady Blackwood's hand threw grotesque shadows upon the walls. At the end of the passage, a door stood half open. From within there came no sound, only the stillness that follows calamity. Poirot, moving with quiet authority, stepped forward and pushed the door wide. Hastings, close behind him, felt his breath catch. The room was a small salon, sparsely lit. Upon the carpet lay the figure of a man, a dark mask still upon his face, but his body unnaturally twisted. A dagger, ornate with a jewelled hilt, protruded from his chest. A trickle of blood had spread into the fibres of the rug, glistening faintly in the candlelight. A lady shrieked, another fainted. There was a rustle of whispers, the beginnings of panic. Poirot raised his hand sharply. "Silence, mesdames et messieurs. The dead, they deserve respect, and we shall learn nothing in this confusion." Lady Blackwood, her composure astonishing, gestured briskly to her butler. "Close the door, Simmons. No one is to leave the house. We must send for the police at once." "But who is it?" cried Miss Eleanor Marsh, her hand pressed to her mouth. Poirot bent over the body, Hastings holding the light nearer. With a careful touch, Poirot removed the mask. The face thus revealed was pale, the lips parted as though in surprise. Hastings gave an exclamation. "Good Lord, it is Charles Denham!" There was a murmur among the assembled guests. Young Denham, heir to a considerable fortune, admirer of Veronica Vale, and, if rumour spoke true, a man with more enemies than friends. Poirot's eyes travelled about the room, noting the arrangement of the furniture, the position of the body, the slight displacement of the curtains near the window. He straightened himself with a small sigh. "He has been dead, I think, for no more than 15 minutes, Poirot said. "The dagger... Ah, yes, it is from the display in the library. I noted it earlier among the collection of antique weapons upon the wall." Lady Blackwood nodded sharply. "Yes, it belongs to the house. It should not have been here." The guests began to exchange fevered whispers. Sir Reginald Brooke swore under his breath, his florid face turning yet redder. Veronica Vale stood quite still, her mask still in place, her eyes glittering through its slits. Mr. Harwood, the solicitor, stepped forward. "This is dreadful." "Most dreadful. But perhaps it was a robbery. Charles Denham might have interrupted a thief." Poirot shook his head gently. "Non, monsieur. Observe. The window is latched from within. And what thief attends a masquerade ball to commit his crime?" The guests looked uneasily at one another. The implication was plain. The murderer was among them. Hastings felt a cold sensation creep down his spine. He glanced about, noting every face, every mask. Each bore guilt in some form. Anger, fear, secrets hidden. Yet who among them had struck the fatal blow? Poirot turned to Lady Blackwood. "It is necessary, madame, that no one leaves the manor until the authorities arrive." "But until then—" He paused, his gaze moving from figure to figure. "Until then, perhaps we may learn something." At his gesture, Simmons, the butler, closed the door upon the dreadful sight. The guests returned, subdued, to the great hall. The music had ceased, the chandeliers blazed with cold splendour, and the masquerade had turned into a vigil. Inspector Graves of the county police arrived within the hour, a tall, angular man with an uncompromising jaw. He listened gravely to Lady Blackwood's account, then turned to Poirot. "You are the famous Belgian detective, sir. Well, I don't object to your assistance, but mark my words, this is a straightforward case. Young Denham was a rash fellow, too many entanglements. We shall soon enough lay hands on the guilty party." Poirot inclined his head with a polite smile. "I shall be most happy if it is so, Inspector. But," he tapped his temple, "sometimes the little grey cells, they tell me otherwise." The inspector set about taking statements. Sir Reginald swore he had been in the smoking room. Veronica Vale insisted she had been on the dance floor, though none could confirm it. Mr. Harwood claimed to have been assisting Lady Blackwood in the library. Eleanor Marsh faltered when asked her whereabouts, finally declaring she had stepped into the conservatory for air. Each alibi seemed thin, riddled with holes. Hastings, watching, marvelled at Poirot's calm scrutiny. He noted how Poirot observed not only the words spoken, but the tremor of a hand, the flicker of an eye, the hesitation before reply. At last, when the guests were dismissed to their rooms under watch, Hastings turned to his friend. "Poirot," he said, "this is a bad business. Denham stabbed in the heart, and any one of them might have done it. But where is the motive?" Poirot smiled faintly, his gaze travelling once more to the darkened corridor of the east wing. "The motive, Hastings, is the simplest thing in the world. It is concealed only by the masks we wear, not upon the face, but upon the soul. Let us remove them, one by one." Chapter 3. The Arrival. The following morning dawned bleak and cold. A fine mist clung to the lawns of Blackwood Manor, obscuring the clipped hedges and statues in ghostly outline. Inside, however, the atmosphere was far from tranquil. Guests who but yesterday had laughed and danced now sat over breakfast in strained silence, the clink of silver on china unnaturally loud. Lady Blackwood presided from the head of the table, her emerald eyes watchful, her voice brisk as ever. Poirot, precise and unhurried, took his tea with an elegance that seemed oddly at variance with the grim circumstances. Hastings, across from him, found himself studying the other diners with a soldier's instinct for unease. Each face told its tale. Sir Reginald scowling into his bacon, Miss Eleanor Marsh pale and anxious, refusing more than a few morsels. Veronica Vale sipping her coffee with apparent calm, though her painted lips tightened ever so slightly when spoken to. Mr. Harwood the solicitor buttering his toast with measured deliberation, as if determined to reveal nothing of his thoughts. Inspector Graves entered, bringing with him the chill of the morning. He nodded curtly to Lady Blackwood, then addressed the table. "You will all forgive the intrusion. But until this matter is cleared, I must request your cooperation. No one is to leave the manor." A murmur of discontent rose. Sir Reginald banged his fist upon the table. "Confound it, Graves! I've business in London that cannot wait. Are we to be treated as prisoners in this house?" Graves's jaw set. "Until I am satisfied, Sir Reginald, yes." Lady Blackwood intervened with her usual authority. "We shall do as the inspector requires. The name of Blackwood shall not be tainted by scandal or resistance. We owe that much to the memory of my late husband, Poirot," dabbed his lips with his napkin and rose. "Inspector, with your permission, I should like to make a small inquiry of my own." Sometimes the outsider, he sees what those inside cannot. Graves eyed him with mingled respect and reluctance. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot. But I remind you, this is a police matter." Poirot inclined his head. "Naturellement, and I shall not overstep. But I have the habit, how do you say, of seeing patterns where others see only confusion." The inspector grunted but did not object. It was thus that Poirot began his round of observations in earnest. Hastings accompanied him, notebook in hand, eager though somewhat bewildered, as ever, by the methodical way in which Poirot pursued the smallest of trifles. Their first visit was to the little salon where Charles Denham had met his death. The body had been removed, but the stain upon the carpet remained, stark against the faded pattern. Poirot moved about the room delicately, as if he feared to disturb some invisible web. He examined the window latch, the drapery cord, the scattered cushions upon the settee. "Note, Hastings," he murmured, "how the dagger was driven with precision. No wild thrust, but a measured blow. This tells us something, does it not?" "That the murderer was strong," Hastings suggested. "Non, that he was calm. Passion may drive the hand to kill, but passion seldom strikes so neatly. Here is control, calculation." He bent to the carpet, frowning at a small fragment of something pale caught in the fibres. With his tweezers he lifted it into view. "A feather," he said softly. "A white feather, from a costume perhaps. You see, Hastings, the masquerade. It was an opportunity, but also a disguise most treacherous. Each mask, each plume, each cloak, any one of them may hide the truth." They visited the library next, where the weapons display hung upon the wall. Poirot studied the vacant space where the dagger had been. His finger traced the outline in the dust. "Observe, mon ami. It was taken not in haste, but with deliberation. One does not wrench away such a piece without care." "It was chosen, Hastings echoed. "Mais oui. Out of many this dagger alone was removed. Why? Because it suited the purpose. Because it had meaning." They were interrupted by the entrance of Eleanor Marsh. She started at sight of them, her hand pressed to her breast. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, I did not know," she faltered. Poirot's voice was gentle. "Mademoiselle, forgive me. It is a painful time. But perhaps you can tell me, did you know well Monsieur Denham?" Her eyes wavered. "We had met on several occasions. He was very charming, but also perhaps very reckless." Poirot's gaze rested upon her steadily. She flushed. "I had heard stories, but I know nothing. Nothing." And with a hurried curtsy she fled the room. Hastings whistled softly. "She is hiding something, Poirot." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, Hastings. But whether it is guilt or merely fear that we must determine." By luncheon the guests had withdrawn to various corners of the house, seeking distraction in books, letters, or subdued conversation. The gaiety of the masquerade seemed a century past. Poirot, however, seemed invigorated. His eyes gleamed, his moustaches quivered as he seated himself by the fire. "My dear Hastings," he said, "we are embarked upon a voyage most delicate. Here we have a young man stabbed with an antique dagger, in a house filled with masks and secrets. Already I discern the faint outline of truth, though much is still concealed. But I promise you, before long, we shall see beneath the disguises, and the murderer, he shall stand revealed." Chapter 4. The questions begin. The afternoon sun lay weak across the lawns of Blackwood Manor, but inside the great house the air was heavy with suspicion. The guests, once united in merriment, now eyed one another with furtive glances, as though every smile concealed a dagger and every silence a plot. Poirot, neat as ever in his dark suit and polished shoes, declared to Hastings that it was the proper moment to begin his interviews. "Each person, Hastings, has his story," he said as they moved toward the morning room, "and in each story there are the small details, the hesitations, the contradictions, that reveal more than the words themselves. One listens, one observes. Voila! The truth emerges like a figure seen through the mist." The morning room, bright with pale curtains and a view upon the garden, was chosen for the task. One by one the guests were asked to attend. Sir Reginald Brooke was the first to arrive, blustering and indignant. He tore the mask from his face, declaring the whole affair a confounded nuisance. "You expect me to sit about like a schoolboy in detention, Poirot? I had dealings with Denham, yes, he was dabbling in ventures he scarcely understood. Shipping, steel, all manner of schemes. I told him straight, he was headed for disaster. But murder? Pah! I'd no reason to dirty my hands." Poirot steepled his fingers, regarding the red-faced man with calm interest. "No reason? And yet you quarrelled with him last evening, n'est-ce pas?" Several guests remarked it. Sir Reginald shifted uneasily. "A trifle. He was pestering that actress, Miss Vale. I warned him she was not his sort. The boy was infatuated, but he'd have tired of her soon enough." "Perhaps," Poirot said softly, "or perhaps not." "Merci, Sir Reginald. That will be all for the present." Next came Miss Veronica Vale, the actress. her crimson mask now discarded but her beauty no less dramatic. She reclined in the chair as though upon a stage, her dark eyes fixed upon Poirot. Poor Charles, she sighed. He was very young, very foolish, but he was devoted. Oh, passionately so. I could not help it if others disapproved. Others such as Sir Reginald? Poirot prompted. She shrugged delicately. Reginald is an old bore. He imagined himself my protector. Perhaps he hoped for something more. Men so often do. Poirot leaned forward. Mademoiselle, where were you when Charles Denham died? Her lashes fluttered. On the dance floor, of course. Dozens saw me, Hastings interjected. Forgive me, but no one has yet confirmed that. For the first time her composure faltered. Surely, someone must remember, she murmured, her hand tightening upon her fan. Poirot said nothing, merely bowed her out with exquisite courtesy. Mr. Harwood, the solicitor, followed. Spare, precise. His manner was that of a man perpetually weighing his words. Denham, he said, adjusting his spectacles. A client of mine, in a manner of speaking. He was negotiating with Lady Blackwood on certain investments. To be frank, I found him rash, overconfident, but dead. It is most regrettable. You were with Lady Blackwood in the library at the time of the crime, were you not? Poirot asked. Yes, we were discussing her will. Matters of inheritance require attention even amidst festivity. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Inheritance. An interesting subject. Monsieur Harwood's lips thinned. I merely safeguard her ladyship's interests. Poirot inclined his head, dismissing him. Miss Eleanor Marsh entered timidly. Her hands twisted the lace of her handkerchief. Please, Monsieur Poirot, I have told you. I was in the conservatory. I had a headache from the music. Poirot's voice was gentle. Mademoiselle, forgive me. But someone heard you quarrel with Monsieur Denham earlier in the evening. About money, perhaps? Her eyes widened with terror. No, not money. Not exactly. He suggested investments. Reckless ones. He said it would free me from dependence upon Lady Blackwood. But I could not. I dared not. I begged him not to speak of it again. Poirot studied her pale face. And so you feared him? Or loved him? Her lips trembled. She made no reply. At last Lady Blackwood herself appeared. Regal, imperious, she faced Poirot as though facing an equal. You waste your time, Monsieur Poirot. The boy was reckless, immoral. He courted my ward with one hand while pursuing that actress with the other. He would have ruined Eleanor, and I would not permit it. But murder, number, I do not stain my hands. My weapons are wealth and influence, not daggers. Poirot bowed gravely. Madame, you speak with great frankness. And yet, I must ask, who in this house benefits by his death? She smiled thinly. That, monsieur, is your task to discover. When the last had gone, Hastings shut the door with a sigh. What a tangle, Poirot! They all had cause to dislike Denham, but not one admits to seeing him at the time of the murder, and their alibis, thin as paper. Poirot sat very still, his eyes closed, his fingertips pressed together. Yes, Hastings. It is as you say, each lies or conceals. Yet in their words there are patterns. Did you notice the little contradictions? The actress who insists upon witnesses none recall, the solicitor who speaks of inheritance on the very night of a masquerade, the ward who trembles too much for innocence. Ah, mon ami, the pieces, they are beginning to fit. He opened his eyes, sharp and bright. But first, we must find the clue that lies in plain sight, the small thing, overlooked, that speaks louder than all their protests. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. Inspector Graves had lost no time in announcing his theory. By late afternoon he summoned the household to the drawing-room, where the fire crackled in defiance of the chill that had settled over Blackwood Manor. His manner was brisk, almost triumphant, as though he relished the moment of unveiling what he considered obvious truth. Ladies and gentlemen, Graves began, his sharp eyes sweeping over the assembled faces, the case, in my judgment, is straightforward. Charles Denham was a young man with too many entanglements. Jealousy and passion, those are the simplest motives for murder, and I have no doubt where to lay the blame. He turned with dramatic force toward Veronica Vale. You, madam, you toyed with his affections. When he pressed his suit too urgently, you rebuffed him. And perhaps more. The dagger stolen from the library was wielded by your hand in the heat of anger. There was a stir among the guests. Eleanor Marsh gave a small cry, and Sir Reginald uttered a thunderous oath. Veronica Vale, however, did not flinch. Instead, she laughed, low and bitter. "Really, Inspector, your imagination does you credit. Do you suppose I risked my career, my freedom, for the sake of a boy's wounded pride? If Charles was dead to me, it was only in my heart. I had no need to kill him." Poirot, seated neatly by the mantelpiece, tapped his fingertips together. "Mademoiselle speaks with calmness. Yet, Inspector, perhaps it is wise to consider. Do we not err when we choose the explanation that is too simple, too neat?" Graves frowned. "Nonsense. The woman had motive and opportunity. That is enough." But Poirot merely smiled. "Parbleu, it is often too much. When one solution appears too convenient, it is usually false. Consider, Hastings. How many saw Mademoiselle Vale near the scene of the crime?" Hastings shifted uncomfortably. "None that we know of." "Just so," Poirot said softly. Later, as the guests dispersed uneasily, Hastings could not restrain himself. "Poirot, I must say I thought Graves had a point. Miss Vale was with Denham often enough. She might easily have struck him down in a fit of passion." Poirot lifted his brows. "So, mon ami, you also are deceived by the obvious." "No, no. The crime was not one of impulse. The blow, it was too deliberate, too precise. Not the act of a woman in a storm of passion, but of a hand cool, calculating. Remember what I told you, Hastings. It was chosen, this weapon. Chosen with purpose." He paced delicately across the room, his patent leather shoes glinting in the lamplight. "No, the police have their red herring, as you say. Let them chase it. We shall look elsewhere." That night Poirot insisted they review the movements of the guests once more. "Sir Reginald, he claims the smoking room," Poirot mused, "but no one confirms his presence there. Lady Blackwood, occupied in the library, she says, with Monsieur Harwood. Yet who verifies it? Eleanor Marsh, alone in the conservatory, and Mademoiselle Vale, on the dance floor with invisible partners. Mon Dieu, the truth hides among these shadows." Hastings rubbed his brow. "But which of them had real reason to kill Denham? He seems to have quarrelled with half the house." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, Hastings, that is precisely what is so convenient. When every person may have had a reason, then perhaps the real reason is one none dare speak." The following morning brought an unexpected discovery. Simmons the butler approached Poirot with discreet urgency. "Begging your pardon, sir, but I found this in the corridor near the east wing." He held out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Poirot opened it delicately. Within lay a gold cufflink set with a tiny black pearl. "Curious," Poirot murmured. "Most curious. This is no trinket, but a costly piece, and it was dropped, perhaps in haste, near the scene of the crime." "Do you recognise it?" Hastings asked. Poirot nodded slowly. "Oui. I observed such cufflinks upon the person of Sir Reginald Brooke only last evening." The revelation struck Hastings like a blow. Then Graves was wrong. It was not Miss Vale at all. It was Sir Reginald. Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Perhaps, or perhaps not. A cufflink, mon ami, may be lost, or planted. We must be most careful not to leap at the bait." That evening Inspector Graves pounced upon the evidence with relish. Summoning Sir Reginald before the company, he flourished the cufflink. "Explain this, sir. It was found outside the very room where Denham was murdered." Sir Reginald's face darkened. "That? Damnation, yes, it is mine. I must have dropped it. But I tell you, I was in the smoking room." Graves folded his arms. "A poor defence. You quarrelled with the victim, you wore the cufflink, and you had strength enough for the blow. It is enough for me." Lady Blackwood's eyes glittered coldly. Eleanor Marsh looked on with mingled fear and relief. Veronica Vale smiled faintly as though vindicated. But Poirot alone seemed unmoved. He regarded Sir Reginald with mild curiosity, then turned to Hastings. "You see, mon ami?" Another red herring. "The cufflink. It appears damning, yet it is too perfect, too precise. The hand of the murderer, it is clever. It seeks to mislead." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But the more one scatters herrings, the more certain it is that the true trail must lie elsewhere. And soon, Hastings, very soon, we shall find it." Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The storm that had threatened all day finally broke that night. Rain lashed the tall windows of Blackwood Manor, and the wind moaned through the chimneys like some restless spirit. Hastings found the atmosphere intolerable. The house, once bright with laughter, now seemed a prison, its corridors hushed, its guests moving like shadows, each weighted with suspicion. Poirot, however, appeared entirely untroubled by the tempest without, or the tensions within. He sat in the morning room by a small fire, polishing his already gleaming shoes when Hastings burst in. "Poirot," Hastings exclaimed, "this business is driving me to distraction." Graves is convinced it was Sir Reginald. The evidence, the cuff-link, well, it seems to me as plain as daylight. Poirot set down his cloth and regarded Hastings with indulgent amusement. "Mon pauvre ami, always you seize upon what is most obvious. But remember, the truth, it hides itself in the small things, the details that others overlook. Last evening, while Inspector Graves shouted of cuff-links, I noted something far more telling." Hastings sat forward eagerly. "What was it?" Poirot leaned back, fingers steepled. "The curtains, Hastings. In the salon where poor Monsieur Denham was killed. You observed them?" "The curtains?" Hastings repeated blankly. "Yes. Heavy velvet drawn close. But one curtain, was slightly askew, as though handled roughly, and behind it, the faintest trace of damp. Tiens, what does that tell us?" "That someone looked out of the window?" Poirot shook his head. "But the window was latched from within, my friend. No, it tells us that someone sought to make it seem as if escape by the window were possible. A false trail, like the cuff-link. Always these attempts to misdirect." He rose suddenly, his eyes bright. "But there is more. Consider the dagger, not thrust wildly, but driven with precision, as I told you. And do you recall, Hastings, the tableau in the library, the costumes, the masks, the weapons? There lies a connection. That afternoon, Poirot asked Simmons the butler to escort him once more to the library. The display still stood, figures in satin and brocade frozen in poses of courtly splendour. Poirot examined them minutely, his gaze darting from the ornate costumes to the weapons arrayed upon the wall. "Observe, Hastings," he said, pointing to a figure clad in white silk with feathered plume. "Do you see a feather missing from the headdress? And where did we find a white feather?" "In the carpet near Denham's body," Hastings recalled. "Exactement. The murderer wore this costume, and therefore whoever claimed it for the evening has much to answer." Simmons cleared his throat nervously. "Begging your pardon, sir, but the costumes were laid out for the guests, and many changed more than once. Some ladies borrowed feathers or ribbons to embellish their attire. It would be difficult to say who wore what at any given hour." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah, that is convenient, is it not? But already we know enough. Somewhere in this masquerade the murderer betrayed himself. A feather, a curtain, a cuff-link. These are the whispers of truth." Their inquiry was soon rewarded with another small discovery. In the conservatory, where Eleanor Marsh claimed to have sought solitude, Poirot stooped to examine the tiled floor. There, half hidden beneath a wicker chair, lay a tiny scrap of paper. Unfolding it, Poirot revealed a hastily scribbled note. "Meet me at midnight. E." Hastings caught his breath. Good heavens! That must be Eleanor Marsh. She arranged a meeting with Denham. Poirot's brow furrowed. Perhaps the E is another. But it is certain, Hastings, that Denham expected a rendezvous, and such a note, it may be the very reason he came to the East Wing at that fatal hour. When confronted, Eleanor trembled violently. "It was not mine. I swear it. I never wrote such a thing. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you must believe me." Poirot regarded her with grave courtesy. "Mademoiselle, I believe that you are frightened. But whether it is of guilt or of discovery, that remains to be seen." She burst into tears and fled, leaving Hastings exasperated. "Dash it all, Poirot. That's as good as a confession." Poirot shook his head gently. "Nor, Hastings. It is as good as a deception. But whose deception? That is the question. Do not forget Denham was entangled with many. A note such as this, it could lure him to his death." That evening Poirot drew Hastings aside. The house was quiet. The guests had retired early, exhausted by the strain. Only the storm still raged without, and the ticking of the great clock echoed in the hall. "My friend," Poirot said softly, "we stand at the edge of revelation. The murderer is clever, weaving red herrings and false trails. But already I see the flaw. Soon, with a little pressure, the mask will slip, and then, then, the truth will astonish them all. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the grounds of Blackwood Manor sodden and grey beneath a pale, reluctant sun. Inside, the atmosphere remained oppressive. Guests avoided one another in the corridors, choosing silence over conversation, secrecy over trust. Every movement seemed measured, every glance heavy with suspicion. Poirot, however, was as calm as though he were preparing for an afternoon tea. He sat at the breakfast table with Hastings, eating his brioche with delicate precision. "It is always the same, mon ami," he said thoughtfully. "When a crime has been committed, men and women think only to protect themselves. They lie, not always about the crime, but about their little secrets, their private indiscretions. And so, one must sift through these falsehoods to discover the one truth that matters." Hastings nodded, buttering his toast rather more vigorously than necessary. "Yes, but they can't all be lying." "It's impossible." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Impossible? No, it is inevitable." That morning, Poirot asked Lady Blackwood for permission to question the household servants. She agreed with a cool lift of her chin, though her eyes were sharp. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot. But remember, the loyalty of my staff is to me. They will not tolerate insult or suspicion." Poirot bowed. "You are most gracious, madame. It is precisely their loyalty that may reveal much." First was Simmons, the butler. His manner was stiff, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "On the night of the masquerade, sir, I was attending the hall as directed. I did not leave my post. And you saw nothing unusual? No one slipping away toward the east wing?" Simmons hesitated. "Only, well, forgive me, sir, but I did see Mr. Harwood pass that way. It was brief, and I thought nothing of it at the time." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, Simmons, you have been most helpful." The housemaid Clara trembled as she spoke. "I was carrying fresh candles to the library, sir, when I overheard voices. Lady Blackwood and Sir Reginald, quarrelling, it seemed. About Mr. Denham, I believe. Her ladyship was angry. Oh, very angry indeed." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "And you are certain of this?" "Yes, sir." Quite certain Cook, stout and red-cheeked, gave another piece of the puzzle. "It was Miss Vale, sir. I saw her slip into the corridor leading to the east wing not long before midnight. She was alone, and she looked, oh, I don't know, troubled." Poirot tapped his fingers together. "Indeed." When the servants had gone, Hastings was aghast. "Poirot, this is hopeless!" Harwood near the scene. Lady Blackwood quarrelling. Vale creeping down the corridor. "Why, every one of them seems guilty." Poirot nodded serenely. "Precisely, Hastings. And yet only one is guilty of murder. The rest, they lie, yes, but their lies serve to hide lesser sins." By midday, the guests themselves began to unravel. Hastings encountered Sir Reginald in the smoking room, pacing furiously. "Confound that Belgian," Sir Reginald muttered. "He sees plots in every shadow." "If Denham is dead, it is no loss. The boy was a fool and worse. But mark my words, Hastings, if Poirot dares accuse me again, by heaven, I'll have satisfaction." And later, in the drawing-room, Hastings stumbled upon Veronica Vale in tears. She started up at once, attempting to compose herself. "Please, don't tell anyone you saw me like this. They'll think it weakness. The truth is, Charles threatened me. He said if I did not agree to marry him, he would ruin me with scandal. That is why I avoided him. But murder, I swear, I had no hand in it." Hastings repeated her words to Poirot, who only nodded. "Ah, so the mademoiselle was not so indifferent as she pretended. There is always more beneath the surface, Hastings. Always the most startling revelation came from Eleanor Marsh herself." Summoned once more by Poirot, she stood pale and trembling, her eyes fixed upon the floor. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "I did write the note, the one you found, but I swear I did not intend harm. Charles pressed me for a secret meeting, and I agreed. Only when the hour came, I lost my courage. I never went. When I heard of his death, I was terrified you would suspect me." Poirot studied her keenly. "And so, mademoiselle, you sought to hide this truth. Why? Because you feared the truth would condemn you?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, and because Lady Blackwood must never know. She would never forgive me for such folly." Poirot bowed gravely. "Merci. You have told me what I needed to hear." When Eleanor had gone, Hastings was at a loss. Well, that explains the note at least. But where does it leave us? Poirot's gaze was far away, his voice low. "It leaves us, Hastings, with a pattern. Quarrels, threats, secrets, each person concealing something. But among all these lies, one stands out as fatal. It is not who met Charles Denham, but who expected him to be found dead." Hastings blinked. "What on earth do you mean?" Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes gleaming. "Patience, my friend. The murderer has woven a web of deceit, but already I see where the strands converge, and very soon the spider will betray itself." Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The evening at Blackwood Manor was subdued to the point of melancholy. A fire burned low in the drawing-room, casting flickering shadows upon the high ceiling. The guests gathered uneasily, compelled by both fear and curiosity, though conversation was stilted and cautious. The murder hung between them like a spectre, making every laugh forced, every glance edged with suspicion. Poirot sat a little apart from the others, small and immaculate in his armchair, hands folded neatly, his eyes half closed. Hastings, who knew him too well to be deceived, recognized that his friend was watching, always watching. Every nervous twitch, every hasty word was carefully noted. It was then that the strain broke. Eleanor Marsh, pale as marble, rose suddenly from her seat. Her hands trembled violently as she clutched the back of a chair, and her wide eyes seemed to dart from face to face as though hunted. "I cannot bear it," she cried, her voice trembling. "This silence, this waiting, it will drive me mad. You must all know I lied. Yes, I wrote that note to Charles. I arranged the meeting. I would have gone to him, if only I had not lost courage at the last moment. If he died, then it was my fault." Her voice broke, and she fell into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. There was a murmur among the assembled guests. Lady Blackwood's face turned stony. Her emerald eyes glittered like hard jewels. "Eleanor," she said icily, "compose yourself at once. This hysteria does you no credit." But Veronica Vale leaned forward, her tone scornful. "So, you lured him and left him. The perfect alibi, is it not? Perhaps you did not lose your courage after all Sir Reginald barked an oath. Rubbish. The girl hasn't the strength to drive a blade into a man's heart. If you ask me, Vale, you've more blood on your hands than she ever could." The actress's eyes flashed. "How dare you?" The quarrel might have grown into chaos had Poirot not risen at that moment. Lifting his hand with gentle authority, his voice, quiet but clear, cut through the tumult. "Mesdames et messieurs, permit me. Mademoiselle Marsh speaks in anguish, but not in guilt. The note, yes, she wrote it, but the hand that struck the fatal blow was another's. You must not mistake her tears for confession." Eleanor looked up at him, her face wet with tears. "Then who, Monsieur Poirot? Who was it?" Poirot's eyes moved, slowly around the room, pausing on each face, each mask of composure or defiance. "That, mademoiselle, I shall reveal in time. For now, know this. The murderer is among us still, and already he has betrayed himself." Later that night, in the quiet of the morning room, Hastings pressed Poirot with urgency. "But surely, Poirot, Eleanor's breakdown must mean something. She as much as admitted she sent Denham to his death." Poirot shook his head gently. "Non, Hastings. She blames herself, yes, but self-reproach is not proof of guilt. Consider, my friend, she says she did not keep the appointment. Yet Charles Denham was found dead precisely where the note summoned him. Who, then, awaited him in her stead? Voilà! There is the true question." Hastings frowned. "But who could have known about the note save Denham and Eleanor?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactement. Which means someone else discovered it, intercepted it perhaps, and that someone was already prepared to strike. A crime of opportunity? Non. A crime of design." The following morning, as the household gathered again for a strained breakfast, another revelation unsettled the uneasy balance. Mr. Harwood, the solicitor, laid down his coffee cup with a deliberate air. "I think it only right," he said, "that certain matters be known." Charles Denham had pressed Lady Blackwood to sign a document, an investment agreement of considerable size. I advised strongly against it. When she refused, Denham threatened exposure of matters best left private. Had that agreement gone through, it would have endangered her entire estate. That, ladies and gentlemen, was his true intention here. All eyes turned to Lady Blackwood, who met them with her usual calm hauteur. Yes, it is true. Denham sought to manipulate my ward and myself both. But do not mistake my candour for weakness. I did not kill him. If I had wished him destroyed, there are subtler means than a dagger. Poirot's head tilted, his gaze fixed upon her face. Indeed, madame, subtler means. And yet sometimes the simplest stroke is chosen, precisely because none would believe it of the person capable of more refined cruelty. Her lips curved in the faintest smile, but she did not reply. That evening, Veronica Vale sought Poirot in private. She found him walking the gallery, hands clasped behind his back. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I must beg you. Believe me when I say I am innocent. Denham was infatuated, yes, but I had no desire for his fortune, no intention of marrying him. I feared scandal, that was all. If you doubt me, ask Sir Reginald. He can confirm." "Ah," Poirot interrupted gently, "but Sir Reginald, he is himself most compromised, n'est-ce pas? And to shelter under the shield of one accused, it is not wise." She flushed, biting her lip. "Then you will condemn me?" Poirot shook his head. "Non, mademoiselle, I condemn no one, yet. But I warn you, the truth will out, and when it does, it will crush the guilty utterly." Later, as Hastings joined him by the fire, Poirot spoke in a low, reflective tone. "You see, Hastings, the masks fall away, one by one. They lie, they confess, they accuse, but always they reveal themselves a little, and soon the strain will be too much. Someone will break, not with tears, as poor Mademoiselle Marsh, but with fear. That, my friend, will be the true turning point." Hastings looked at him keenly. "And you know who it is already?" Poirot smiled, a small, enigmatic smile. "Perhaps. The little grey cells, they whisper to me. But the proof, I require just one more piece. Then, Hastings, the masquerade will end." Chapter 9. The Trap. The great drawing-room of Blackwood Manor had been transformed. At Poirot's request, Lady Blackwood had ordered all the guests to assemble there after supper. The fire burned high, throwing restless light across the carved panelling and heavy draperies. Outside, the night pressed close against the windows, a darkness deep and unbroken. Hastings felt the tension in the air as one might feel the charge before a storm. Each guest entered warily, their expressions guarded, their voices subdued. Sir Reginald stalked in with belligerent stride, his jowls flushed. Veronica Vale glided behind him, a scarlet silk shawl draped dramatically about her shoulders. Eleanor Marsh came pale and trembling. Lady Blackwood regal and unsmiling, Mr. Harwood precise and stiff. Even Inspector Graves had returned, grim and determined to see the affair concluded. Poirot stood by the mantelpiece, small, dapper, his eyes bright, his moustaches bristling with determination. He waited until silence fell, and then he began, his voice quiet but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, you are weary, perhaps even resentful of these inquiries, but murder, you see, it casts its shadow over us all. One of you here is guilty of the death of Charles Denham, and tonight I shall prove which there was a stir, murmurs, nervous glances." Inspector Graves folded his arms, sceptical but attentive. Poirot continued, pacing slowly across the room. "From the beginning there have been distractions, oui? A cuff-link left by the body, so convenient, so incriminating, that it could not be the truth. A window curtain drawn aside to suggest an escape that was never made. And finally a note that lured poor Monsieur Denham to his death. Ah, but who intercepted that note? Who turned a tryst of love into a summons of death?" Eleanor Marsh gave a soft sob, but Poirot did not falter. "Consider also the dagger. Not any blade, but one taken from the display in the library. A weapon chosen, not seized in passion. And the blow. Ah, it was delivered with precision. This was no crime of sudden rage. It was planned, arranged, executed with cool deliberation." Poirot paused before Sir Reginald. "You quarrelled with the young man, mon cher monsieur. You had motive. You had strength. And yet, the cuff-link that condemned you was too obvious, too perfectly placed. You were framed." Sir Reginald gave a grunt of relief, though suspicion still clouded his eyes. Poirot turned sharply to Veronica Vale. "And you, mademoiselle, you feared scandal, perhaps even ruin, if Denham's threats were carried out. But the evidence of your guilt, it vanishes upon close inspection. No, you did not wield the dagger." Veronica lifted her chin defiantly. Poirot moved on. "Eleanor Marsh, innocent, frightened, ensnared by Denham's charm. You wrote the note, yes, but you lacked the courage for violence. And Lady Blackwood—" He turned, bowing slightly. "Madame, you are proud, commanding, ruthless in your way. You quarrelled with Denham, but you did not strike him down." Lady Blackwood's expression did not alter, though her fingers tightened upon the arm of her chair. Poirot stopped before Mr. Harwood, the solicitor. His gaze sharpened. "And then, there is you, monsieur, the discreet lawyer, always near at hand, always guarding the secrets of the Blackwood estate. You were seen near the East Wing that night. You advised Lady Blackwood against Denham's schemes, and more. You alone had the knowledge of the will, the fortune, the delicate matters of inheritance. Denham threatened exposure, and that exposure would have ruined not only Lady Blackwood, but you, her adviser, her confidant, the one who managed her affairs." A ripple of unease passed through the company. Mr. Harwood stiffened but said nothing. Poirot raised a finger. "But do not fear, mes amis. I do not accuse yet, for still one piece is missing. The murderer has been careful, très careful. But tonight I shall set a trap. I shall force his hand." He moved to the centre of the room. "Inspector Graves, if you will permit, I have taken the liberty of arranging a little experiment. Each of you shall describe in turn what you wore on the night of the masquerade. Exact detail, s'il vous plaît. Every feather, every ribbon, every jewel. And then we shall see whose costume betrays them." There was a murmur of protest, but Poirot's authority prevailed. One by one the guests complied. Sir Reginald recounted his black domino and silver mask. Veronica Vale, her scarlet gown with the crimson plume. Eleanor Marsh, her pale blue silk delicate with lace. Lady Blackwood, her emerald gown with the peacock feathers. "At last, reluctantly, Mr. Harwood spoke. "I wore a suit of white satin with a feathered headdress." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Précisément, the white feather, found upon the carpet beside the murdered man. The murderer, he left his mark that night, despite his caution, and now, monsieur, you stand revealed." A gasp swept the room. Eleanor Marsh clutched the back of her chair. Sir Reginald swore violently. Veronica Vale's eyes widened with sudden comprehension. Mr. Harwood's face had gone ashen. "This is absurd." "A feather? A trifle. It proves nothing." Poirot lifted his hand, his voice firm. "No, monsieur. It proves everything. You lured Denham to his death with the note intended for Mademoiselle Marsh. You took the dagger from the library. You struck him down with calm deliberation. And you left, by chance or design, the feather that betrayed you. Soon I shall show you why. Why you, above all others, could not let Denham live." The room fell silent, heavy with shock. Poirot's words hung in the air like the tolling of a bell, and Hastings, watching his friend, felt the certainty of it in his bones. The trap had sprung. The murderer was caught. Chapter 10. The Reveal. A hush gripped the drawing-room. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, but no one stirred. All eyes were fixed upon Poirot, who stood poised at the centre of the room like a conductor before an orchestra. The little Belgian detective smoothed his moustaches with deliberate calm, then began to speak. "Mesdames et messieurs, you wish for clarity. Very well, I shall give it to you. The death of Monsieur Charles Denham was no crime of passion, no rash quarrel turned fatal. It was a crime of calculation, conceived long before the masquerade and executed with precision." He turned toward Mr. Harwood, who sat stiffly, his lips pressed in a hard line. "Monsieur Harwood, you are a man of discretion, are you not? You guard the secrets of Lady Blackwood's estate. You manage her affairs with the utmost care. And yet, when Charles Denham threatened to expose certain irregularities, your position became perilous." Harwood's eyes flashed. "I deny it utterly. My service to Lady Blackwood has ever been honest." Poirot raised his hand. "Honest? Mais non. You manipulated the accounts. Small diversions of funds, unremarked by your mistress, yet enough to swell your own fortune. But Charles Denham, reckless though he was, had discovered hints of your fraud. He pressed Lady Blackwood for an agreement that would have revealed the truth. You could not allow that, so you resolved to silence him. Gasps rose from the company. Lady Blackwood's eyes blazed with fury, though whether at Denham or at her solicitor's betrayal none could say. Poirot continued, his voice steady. You intercepted the note written by Mademoiselle Marsh. You knew Denham expected her in the East Wing, and so you made sure he would come. You took the dagger from the library, chosen, not snatched, and you struck him down, calmly, deliberately. Then you sought to divert suspicion. A cufflink dropped, a curtain disturbed, a window made to appear an escape. All red herrings. He paused, turning slowly to address the room. But the feather, monsieur, that betrayed you. A single plume of white silk fallen from your headdress. It told me the truth, and when you admitted, a moment ago, that you wore white satin and feathers, voila. The trap was sprung. Harwood leapt to his feet, his composure shattered. This is madness! A feather, a trifle. You cannot condemn me on such nonsense. Poirot's eyes gleamed. But there is more, monsieur. Inspector Graves. If you please, search his rooms. Graves dispatched a constable at once. Minutes later, the man returned bearing a small box. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. Poirot lifted them delicately. Correspondence between you and your agents, monsieur. Proof of your embezzlement. And this, he held up the last letter. A draft agreement with Denham's signature, demanding half your share in return for his silence. Blackmail, is it not? He had discovered your theft, and he pressed his advantage. You killed him, not only to protect your position, but to destroy the evidence he carried. Harwood's face drained of colour. He sank back into his chair, his hands trembling. I never meant... It was not supposed to... Poirot's voice was pitiless. Murder is never supposed to happen, monsieur. Yet it does. And always the guilty betray themselves. You planned carefully, but you didn't account for the little details. A feather, a curtain, the choice of a dagger, too precise to be chance. Always, it is the small things that reveal the truth. The silence was broken only by Eleanor's sob of relief. Sir Reginald swore softly. Veronica Vale pressed a hand to her lips, and Lady Blackwood rose with queenly indignation. You have disgraced this house, Harwood. You will answer for it in full measure. Inspector Graves stepped forward, grim and efficient. James Harwood, I arrest you for the murder of Charles Denham. Harwood did not resist. He bowed his head, broken, as the constable led him away. When the company had dispersed at last, Hastings turned to his friend with undisguised admiration. By Jove, Poirot, you've done it again. I thought for certain it was Vale, or perhaps even Lady Blackwood herself. But you saw through every false lead. Poirot smiled, smoothing his moustaches. It is simple, Hastings. One does not rely on chance or passion. One observes, one thinks. The murderer, he was clever, but he forgot that always, always, it is the little grey cells that triumph. Hastings laughed, shaking his head. Well, I'll never look at a feather the same way again. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Nor should you, mon ami, for sometimes the smallest feather may unmask the heaviest crime. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The following day dawned clear. The storm of both weather and murder passed. Blackwood Manor seemed almost peaceful in the early light, the lawn sparkling with dew, the birdsong tentative but hopeful. Yet within, the echoes of the previous nights lingered like a shadow in the great hall. Poirot and Hastings took breakfast in a small parlour overlooking the gardens. Hastings, his spirits restored, attacked his eggs with the appetite of a man relieved of tension. Poirot, by contrast, nibbled, delicately at a croissant, his eyes thoughtful, his movements measured as ever. It's extraordinary, Poirot, Hastings said between mouthfuls. To think how we were misled at every turn, the cufflink, the note, the quarrels. Graves was convinced it was Vale, and for a time I thought it must be Eleanor. Yet you never faltered. You saw through it all. Poirot inclined his head modestly. Mais oui, Hastings, but do not imagine it was easy. The murderer, he was clever. He scattered his false clues with care, but such artifices, they are too contrived, too perfect, and always there remained the small details that did not fit. He set down his cup and steepled his fingers. Consider, mon ami, the dagger. Too precise a blow for passion. Consider also the window, disturbed though it was locked from within. Such devices are not the work of chance but of design. And when one seeks to design too much, that is when one betrays oneself. Hastings leaned back, reflecting. Yes, I see it now. And the feather. So small a thing, yet it was enough. Poirot's eyes gleamed. It is always so, Hastings. Men believe the great schemes conceal them, but it is the trifles that undo them. That is why I attend always to the detail. The cut of a cuff, the turn of a phrase, the tremor of a hand. Murder is an act most grave, but it is also human, and in humanity there are always flaws. Later that morning, Lady Blackwood requested a private word with Poirot. She received him in her study, her tall figure framed by the great window, her expression still proud, though softened now with something like weariness. "You have rendered me a service, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "This house will not be stained by scandal of an unsolved crime. For that I am grateful. And yet," she paused, her eyes narrowing, "I cannot help but think how near ruin we stood. That man, Harwood, was my adviser for years. To be so deceived—" Poirot bowed. "It is ever thus, madame. Those who betray us are not strangers, but those we trust most." Her lips curved in a thin smile. "You're a cynic, monsieur," Poirot spread his hands. "A realist only. But permit me, madame, to add this. You're strong. You will rebuild. And your ward, Mademoiselle Marsh, she is young. She will recover if you allow her kindness for a moment." Lady Blackwood's composure wavered. "Perhaps I shall try," she inclined her head. "You have my gratitude, Monsieur Poirot, though I cannot say I enjoyed the manner in which you stripped away the masks." Poirot smiled faintly. "That, madame, is the way of truth. It is seldom enjoyed, but always necessary." As Poirot and Hastings prepared to depart later that day, Hastings cast a last look at the manor. The lawns, the grand façade, the stately oaks beyond. It was hard to believe that within such beauty lay greed, betrayal, and murder. "Do you know, Poirot," he said thoughtfully, "these great houses, they seem splendid, yet they conceal more misery than one would guess. It's as though behind every gilded curtain some dreadful secret waits." Poirot adjusted his gloves with precision. "Just so, Hastings. But also they conceal love, loyalty, the little dramas of the heart. One must not think only of the evil, though evil there is. One must see the whole, the human comedy." Hastings chuckled. "You mean to say you see it all as a stage play?" Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Mais certainement. The world is a theatre, and men and women, they play their parts. Some act for love, some for greed, some for ambition, but in the end the truth is always revealed in the smallest gesture, the smallest line spoken out of place. That is why Poirot triumphs, because Poirot listens and Poirot sees." As they stepped into the waiting motor car, Hastings shook his head with admiration. "Well, old chap, I hope the next affair we encounter is less grim. A stolen necklace, perhaps, or a missing parrot." Something of that sort. Poirot allowed himself a rare smile. "Ah, Hastings, do not hope for ease. Where there is man, there is folly, and where folly leads, murder follows. We shall have need of the little grey cells again sooner than you think." The car drove away, leaving Blackwood Manor behind, standing proud against the morning sky. Within its walls, peace might return for a time, but for those who had worn masks at the masquerade, the memory of that night would never fade.